We are on Daf Chof Tes Amud Beis. There's no two dots here. We're right in the middle. The last word on the line. It's a little bit more than half the way down. So the rule is that generally when you have someone makes a haidah, we've been talking about how you make a haidah, what exactly that you have to do it, where it has to be instructed from the person who's being mechayiv himself, who's being moida. He has to instruct the Edom that he wants them to be Edom to his haidah. And then what happens is they'll very often he'll tell them he wants them to write it down, his haidah, that he can then give it to the person who he owes it to, and that person will have a permanent memento, a permanent recording of the loan. And that has two major effects if he writes it down. Let's say Reuven admits he owes money to Shimon, and he says it to two Edom, and he says, write down that I'm saying I owe money to Shimon, and he then gives it to Shimon. There will be two things. First of all, at this point, it will be a milva that's written in a shtar, and therefore anything that Reuven sells, any karka that Reuven sells that from that point on, there will be a lien on it because this milva was bishtar. If a halva that's bishtar, when someone has a shtar, so saying that if Shimon has a shtar saying that Reuven owes him money, from that point on, anything that Reuven sells is going to be a meshubed to the loan. That's one effect having it written down will have. And secondly, if Reuven says I already paid it, and Shimon says, but I still have this shtar that says that you owe me the money, Reuven is not going to be believed. Whereas if it's just an oral loan, Reuven could be believed that he paid it. So what happened? If someone made a haidah in front of Shnaim, in addition, he made a kinyan. Reuven said, I'm making a kinyan, I'm going to pick up this handkerchief to show that I owe this money to Shimon. Kaisvin. The Edom are treated as if they were instructed to write down a shtar. But if there's no kinyan, ain't kaisvin. They don't have a right to write it. Even though Reuven has admitted he owes them money, it's not the same thing as saying he wants them to write it. Maybe he wants to reserve. He wants it to remain a milva b'peh. B'pnei shloisha v'lo economy adu. What happens if it was in front of three people, but he didn't make a kinyan? So maybe this is going to be a question. It's a machlokes. Rav Amar Kais, and Rav says the Edom are treated as if they were instructed to write it down, because since they're three people, that's similar to a bezdin. And when anything that's in front of a bezdin, a person has the assumption that it's going to be written down. Ravasi Amar, and because it has the koil, which is the reason why there's a shibud. Ravasi Amar ain't kaisvin. Ravasi says no. It's still he did not. The litigant, the person who's admitting, did not instruct them to write. And as far as he's concerned, maybe he just treats it as three Edom. He doesn't want them to be treated as a bezdin, that they could write it down. There was such a case where someone told three Edom to write down, and Rav said, we have to take notice of Ravasi, and therefore the Edom cannot write it down. Amravad Barava. Ho-Udisa, this person who is Maida, Zimnin Kasvinim and Zimloi Kasvinim. Sometimes you write it down and sometimes you don't write it down. Meaning if it was Maida to three people, we just said it's Machlokes Rav or Ravami and Ravasi. He says sometimes it's not always one way or the other. It depends. Kanifi v'yasvi, if the litigant sat down and then the Edom sat down, you don't write it down. If the litigant was the person who's being moida, told the Edom to come, then they're not like a bezdin because he was the one who arranged it. So a person does not arrange a bezdin to come. Kanfinu iu kasvinu. But if it's the other way around, it's the other way around. If they were already there and nobody gathered them together, they would happen to be standing there, and he said, "Oh, I'm going to be Maida." So then it's not like a bezdin. But if he asked them to come and sit there, so he's trying to put them together. He could have really just asked for two, and he asked for three. That has more of an appearance of a bezdin, and therefore they can assume that he wants them to write it down. Rava Amafilu Kanfinu Iu Lekasvina, even if he organized them to come, it still doesn't have the appearance of a bezdin. Adamu Havalai Daini, until he says, "I want you to be Dayanim." Then it's more like a bezdin, and then they could write it down. Ma'abravashi Amafilu Ama Havalai Daini, he says even that's not enough. Lekasvina. Adika boy duchta v'shalchi mazaminle, until these Adim, who are also Dayanim, they sit themselves down and they ask this person who is Maida to come to them, and then he is Maida them. So according to Marbar Ravashi, it really has to have very much like a bezdin, that these three people call him to come, and he comes to them. Then they're like a bezdin, and that's at that point you can write it down. But anything less than that, they could just be Adim, and he doesn't want it to be written down. If you're Maida about metaltalim, which really means money, someone's Maida that he owes money, and there's a kinyan. So we said before kaisvin, you could write. Then we said before vimlav and kaisvin. This is just a reiteration of the first halacha that we said, that a kinyan makes it that the Adam could write down the chiyuv. The mekarki makakoi v'loikanu miyadei mai. What happens if it's karkoi? Amemar Amar ein kaisim, Marzutra Amar kaisim. That's going to be a machlekes, because karka is not like metaltalin. In that karka, as soon as someone says that I owe this karka belongs to that person, it immediately belongs to that person. There's no further transaction needed. Karka belongs to whoever it belongs to, wherever it is. So if the person said it's yours, then it immediately transfers into your possession. It means it was always yours, right? Karka, there's no. If a person's saying it's not mine, that means it's yours. It's not something that has to be then taken. If you're talking about money, right? Then he says, "I owe you $100." If Reuven says to Shimon, "I owe you $100," Shimon does not automatically get to have Fidelity make a bank transfer. There still has to be a transfer of the money. But karka is what it is. So once he said that it belongs to you, it belongs to you. So there's no problem with saying kaisvin. It's not going to take away. It's not going to cause anyone to lose anything that you're going to take away from the kuchas. It already went to the person who it belongs to. So kaisvin. Now halacha is taka that you can write, because like we said, karka, it belongs to whoever it belongs to. Ravina ikla l'demaharia. He came to his place, the Maharia Amalei Rav Huna, the Maharia Ravina Metal Visnu Beinayumai. We said the din of Kasef. If someone has $100, we said you need to have a kinyan in order for the Adam to write it down. We said that doesn't hold true by Mekarka, because it automatically goes back to who it belongs to. What happens if Shimon lent $100 to Reuven, and Reuven still has the envelope with the $100 in cash there? So what is the din? Do we say that since he never spent it, the $100 is still there? Do we say that it's treated like karka? Since it's still there, so he has to give back the same $100. If Reuven says, "Listen, I have the $100 that you gave me and I owe it to you," so then it's as if it's already given back, or not. He said, yes, it's treated like karka. Since it's right there, he's going to give it back to the person who he owes it to, so you might as well write it down. Ravashi Amar, keep the mechsuri gavaina loy. Ravashi says, no, there's a lot of space between the fact that you have you're standing there holding the envelope with the $100, and you said you owed it to him. You could just put it right back into your pocket and say, I'm going out to eat lunch. You spend it on a steak dinner, and then it's the person who it's owed to has to then go through the court process to get his $100 back. The guy can say, "Look, I don't have any money. I ate it." So now he has to go finding if he has any assets, and he has to go through the whole process. It's not like karka. Karka, wherever it is, if he says this is your karka, it's yours. There's no. It's quite simple to go put up his shingle on the karka, but money could be spent before it's given. Okay, so now we're talking about a simple admission where you write it down, right? With two people, Reuven admitted to Shimon in front of two people that he owes him money, and he said to the Eidim, they wrote it down on a star, but he missed. There's a set system for how you should write it down. Okay, we're up to Chavtes Amud Beis, about 8 lines in the bottom. Hahi Aidisa. The normal way when you write a admission, a star that Reuven said I owe money to Shimon, in order to avoid all these problems, you write it down, and then it becomes like a milva b'shtar. But you're supposed to write a certain formula. You have to say lana kis ama lana kisvu. The Reuven told us to write it, v'chismu, and to sign it, v'havule, and to give it to him. So that's the formula that the Eidim are supposed to write, and they didn't write it. They both say that this will be covered under the rule of Reish Lakish. What's the rule of Reish Lakish? If you have Eidim who signed on a star that says Reuven sold this karka to Shimon, and we're not sure if we don't know when this sale took place, and the question is a person cannot sell a Yerusha of karka that he received from his father until he's 20 years old. That's the Takanas Chachamim. We don't trust someone to make wise decisions before they're 20, which is very interesting. It's very rare that the Gemara will have a later age for responsibility than what we have in 2025. Right? Someone when they're 18 could go sell property. He could sell. Warren Buffett's kid could sell $10 billion worth of property when he's 18, unless his father contract. But the Gemara understood that a person under 20 should not be selling his father's karka. It's part of the family's inheritance. But the question is, we didn't know whether he was over 20 or not. And but he wrote a star, and Eidim signed on it, and we don't know, was it before 20 or after 20? So we say the Eidim would not have signed. They know the rule that he has to be 20 years old. They would not have signed unless he was already 20 at the time of the star. So Reish Lakish says that we can assume from the fact that Eidim signed on something that they know what the rule is, and they're complying with the rules. They wouldn't have signed a star. That's not going to be effective. So the same thing over here. If you have two Eidim that signed on a star, even though they didn't say, the star does not say that they were instructed by the person who was being maida, who was admitting to the loan, to write it. But we know that the halacha is that it does have to be instructed by the person who's admitting. He has to tell the Eidim, I want you to be Eidim. So therefore, we can assume, even though it wasn't written in the star, that was the case. But otherwise, it wouldn't be effective. Maskal Rav Papa, the Itema Rav Huna Breder of Yeshua, Mika Midi Danan Lo Yadina V'Safri de Beidina Yadi. He said, I never heard about this. I wasn't aware that the halacha is that you have to have the Eidim instructed to sign on the star. So, or that you have to, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. You have to write that into the star. So how could you say that these Eidim will certainly know about it? I myself didn't know. He obviously knew the rule that the person who's admitting has to instruct Eidim, but he didn't know that it's supposed to be part of the star. It has to be written into the star. So how could you say that these Eidim would have known it, and therefore it's treated as if it was written in it? So Gemara Shalinu l'sifrei d'Abaye v'yadi, l'sifrei d'Rava v'yadi. The Ataka asked the Sefer, and they all knew this rule. So he said he was wrong. That means they assumed that because they didn't know, they weren't aware And it makes sense if you think about it. It's not really, we're talking about here is not so much a halacha as much as what the hanhaga is. It's because the hanhaga was always included in the shtar. Its absence is what makes it a problem. So the Seifrim, the people who write it, they know that it's supposed to be written in. The Rav, this is more a matter of fact. Is it normally written or is it not? So he said, this Rav Huna Berda of Yeshua, that, or a Papi said, I didn't know that this is required to be in it. But they asked the Seifrim, they said, yeah, we all know that that's supposed to be in it. And therefore the Eidim must have checked that they must have been instructed to write it by the person who was Maidim. Hahia Disa, there was a Haidah, one of the shtaros of Haidah, by two Eidim that said that Reuven said, I owe money to Shimon. To have a Kosabe Duchrim Piskami, this note, this Piskam, this letter, which I'm writing, B'chol Lishna, the Beidina, and it was written in the way that you always write a psak of a bezdin. Well, I have a kasav ba, but it was only signed by two people. It said that Reuven owes money to Shimon. Well, I have a kasav ba b'moisav tlas avina v'chad l'savi. But it didn't say on it that we're signing it as two people, but the third person, who was the third member of the bezdin, is no longer here. So the question is, what do we treat it right? Do we treat it as a psak bezdin that, because it's written in the form of a psak bezdin, but it's missing. It was only a psak bezdin with two people, or do we assume that it was really three people and the one wasn't there? Which normally you would write it. You would write that we're signing it as Eidim that this was decided by a bezdin of three. So Ravina wants to say again, this is like Rish Lakish. In order for this to be a kosher, even though it didn't write that there were three dayanim originally, but it's written in the form of a psak din, so therefore we treat it as a psak din. Like Rish Lakish said, they must have known that in order for it to be a psak din, you need three, and they just didn't write it. Rava says no. It could be that they were a bezdin could sometimes make a mistake, and they did not know the rule that you have to have three dayanim. But if they didn't just write it in the style of a bezdin, but they actually wrote that we're a bezdin, suloi tzarach. At that point, you no longer need to worry that it's a bezdin tayin, because they clearly know if they're saying that they're a bezdin, then they know that that a bezdin needs three. The mistake they would have made is that they could be treated as the two Eidim can make a psak. But once they say a bezdin, they realize that they're a bezdin, they know that they need three. And therefore they're treated as if there must have been really three, and just two of them were witnesses. Shmuel is chaylik, like we had earlier. Shmuel holds that Yitaka in Dine Mamnis, you only need two to make a din, as long as they both agree. Because what's the difference? Even if you have three, you're gonna have to have two that agree. So two is also enough.
Like mechutzah?
Yeah, mechutzah. They're chutzpah. You shouldn't do it. Shmuel holds that a bezdin of two in Dine Mamnis is effective, but it's a bezdin chutzpah. It's a mechutzpah dika bezdin. You shouldn't be doing that. You should really have three. So tomorrow, the Kosabe Dina de Rabna Ashi. They wrote that it's the bezdin of Rav Ashi, and Rav Ashi certainly didn't paskin like Shmuel, and therefore they must have known that you have to have three. So tomorrow, maybe these Talmidim who learned by Rav Ashi, they hold like Shmuel, who says that you only need two, and they thought you only need two, but we don't paskin like Shmuel. So tomorrow, the Chsiv Amalana Anlan Rabbana Ashi. They didn't just write that we're Talmidim of Rav Ashi, but Rav Ashi paskined on this, and Rav Ashi certainly did not paskin like Shmuel. Tan Rabban, Amalan Echad, Ani Reisi Avichem Shehitmin Mois Beseda Tevu Migdal. If someone, a single individual, we're going away from Eidim now for a din of Eidim, but we're talking about a single individual says to the children of grieving children whose father died. And he says to them, and I saw your father, he put money into this box or this closet, but he told me when he put it in, it belongs to your father said it's not his money, it belongs to someone else. Or shall Maisa Sheni, and it has to be Maisa Sheni has to be Orto Yerushalayim. Bebayis le'amar klum b'sada dvar kayam. If it was in a bias, if it was in the house of the grieving person where these kids are leaving, then he hasn't said anything. If he tells the kids, your father has a safe in the basement, and he one time told me that he has money there that belongs to another person, they don't have to listen to him because he had no access to that money. And what the aidus of one person is nothing. But if it's somewhere in the field, and he told them that it belongs to a third party, this aide could have just taken it himself. There's no control, nothing stopping him from taking it. And from the fact that he didn't take it, but rather he told them, it's your father's, but it belongs to a third party, so he has sort of like amigo. He could have taken it himself, and he didn't do so, so therefore he has nemanis, and they have to give it to the person that he said. The rule is anything that he could have taken. It means it's not just belonging to, it's not someone else's. So he's believed. If he was going to steal it, basically saying that it doesn't belong to him when it does belong to him is stealing. So he could have just stolen it directly if he has access to it. What about a case where rather than there being a third party telling the Yarshim themselves saw their father, that he hid money in a safe, in a closet or a box, and the father told them, I'm putting it in the safe, but it belongs to a third party. It belongs to Maisa Sheni. If it's like he's about to die and he's giving them instructions, and it looks like he's really means the instructions, then you have to listen to him. But if he seems like he's trying to pull shtick, which Rashi says, what is the ma'arim? Ma'arim is a little bit up, opposite Hagoyes Habach. Ma'arim shu misyarash lo yitlam b'chayev. One is maybe he's scared that his kids are going to take it while he's alive. That means he knows that they're so he wants them to think that it belongs to someone else. That way they won't take it. Or they'll say, look, Dad has $10 million in his safe. We can go spend like whatever we want. We'll buy you a Ferrari. Therefore, if it appears that that's why he said that it belongs to someone else, just to keep them in check, then we don't. Then they're not restricted after he dies from taking that money. This is an interesting Gemara. If someone got money from his father, John Gotti Jr. got money from his father, and he's not comfortable that his father got it from a kosher place. And he had a chalaim, he had a dream. And this son didn't even know where the money was. And he had a dream, and it says, go out to the tree in the orchard, the fourth tree from the left, and dig under the branches, and you'll find a box. And that box really belongs, that's something that belongs to someone else, or it's of Meiser Sheni that your father never took care of. Zehaya Meisa. And this is Taka what happened. He went there and he found the money. V'amru, divrei chalaim mislei malam v'lei maridin. What person sees in a dream is of no legal consequence. He can keep the money, the gezunta hate, even though he only found it because of the dream and he had no knowledge about it. The dream told him where it was. Dreams also have parts that are not true. So,
what do you this part of the sword say that it was why can't it be a regular case they had a dream about?
We're saying even if it was someone that was chayshid, that his father was not on the up and up. He started with he wasn't sure about it. And he had a dream. And the dream indicated what his father had and where it was. And that his father Taka, it wasn't his own money. He still does not have to return it. A chalaim is a chalaim. We are the people of, we are legal people. We follow the law. No? It's interesting.
Very interesting.
It could be. I mean, it sounds very definitive. It's saying like it makes no difference. It's not like if you go to your Rav, he'd say, I would think like the Rav would say, listen, you had a dream, Reb Chaim Kanievsky came to you and told you that you should, and you found it, that you should, you should, just to be careful, maybe you should give it back. What is this? It's this makes a Litvak like me very happy, such a Gemara. Zak Gemara, Shnaim Oimrim Zakai. We said in the Mishnah that if you had two Eidim that said that Ruvain does not owe the money to Shimon, and one says that he does, we said that you Bezdin Paskins and they give the psak down and then you follow it. So Michtav Heichi Kasvi. When the judges in a Bezdin come to a decision, a Bezdin of 3, how do they write down the final decision? Rav Yochanan Amar Zakai. Rav Yochanan just says Reuven does not have to pay. He's potter. He's innocent. He doesn't have to pay. Rish Lakish Amar Pliny Mezakin, Upliny Mechayven. They say that in the psak you write which judges said what. Reuven, let's say the judges were Hananiah, Mishal, and Azariah. Hananiah and Mishal said you're off the hook, and Mishal said you're chayiv. So the first pshat is you just say give what the psak is without any explanation. Second is that you give Rish Lakish said that you give a full explanation of which judge said what. Laza says you just say Midivrayim Nizdaka Pliny. You let them know that there was a split decision, but you don't say what the decisions, who said what. My beinayu, what's the difference between them? About what if the decision gets overturned, they made a mistake in din, and therefore under certain circumstances the Bezdin has to pay if they made a mistake. They made a mistake and they didn't know the halacha that they should have known. So whether this third judge has to join in to pay. Tilmanda amazakai, kuntamanda that you don't say what the details of the psak were is mishalim. He does have to pay with the other two judges. He doesn't pay. It's fact the Gemara, meaning that if it's going to be anyway that they're all going to have to pay, so there's no point in saying who said what. But if it's going to be that only the ones who got the din wrong have to pay, so you tell him up front who said what, because that's going to make a difference in who's going to have to pay.
But what about Rabbi Lazar?
The Gemara doesn't really say what. L'chaira, he agrees with Rabbi Yochanan that he doesn't have to pay. I'm sorry, the Rabbi Yochanan that he does have to pay a chelik. But as we're going to see in the Gemara, we don't want to make a. If we just say zakai, it would appear like they changed their mind. Like at the beginning, that we said that he's potter altogether. We didn't say there's anyone who disagreed. Then when the times when we find out that they made a mistake and they pay up, he only gets paid 2/3. He's going to say, why'd you say zakai if one of the judges disagreed? So therefore he says you just indicate that there's there's a split decision, so it won't be mechse keshikra.
You mean are we going to get into later how they do the payment? What do you mean a third? I thought it means there's one payment and either you split 2 ways or 3 ways.
We're going to see. There's going to be two. It's going to be a question of whether the two judges who made a mistake have to pick up. That's going to be a different shita. So according to the Mandam who says zakai, if you're saying that according to the Mandam who says that you just say that he's potter and we don't say who said what, and because the third judge has to pay even though he didn't paskin along with the first two, he could say, why am I paying for a mistaken verdict that I didn't agree with? If you would have agreed with me that I paskin correctly, no one would have had to pay anything. This is what now we're getting to what you had just asked, Menachem. The question is whether the first two have to pick up the third person's the third judge's chelik. Lamanda Mazakai, according to Mandam, who says that we just say Yipotter Mishalmi, because that's what taka happens. He was told he's potter, and now he's getting, and now it turns out he doesn't have to pay. Now he has to pay, but it was a mistake. So they have to pay for the person who they wronged. They have to pay. They pay the full thing, so they could just say Zakai. It doesn't make a difference. They're going to get fully reimbursed in any case. Lamanda Amar Pliny Mizakanu Pliny Mechayvin. According to Mandamba, that you say exactly what happened. Loi Mishalmi, because the person who the judge who the two judges who were mistaken, they're not going to have to pay for that extra chelik. So therefore, it's important for the litigant to be clear that not all the judges agreed, and therefore, when he gets reimbursed, he only gets reimbursed by the ones who made a mistake. I'm pretty sure, and I can't back this up because I don't remember where, but I'm pretty sure we saw that that the judges have to pay back is only up. They're entitled to be reimbursed by the person. It's just like they have to pay up for now, but then they can get paid back by the person who actually owes the money. I don't remember where I saw this, but I feel like I remember learning this in the Gemara. According to Mandamar, so now the Gemara asks on this. According to Mandamar, that says that they just say Zakai because anyway the two judges pay the full amount of what was paid. They have to reimburse the full amount. They could say to the third judge, if you were not part of this bezdin, we wouldn't have been able to come to a conclusion. So you're responsible. So it seems weird, right? Because he said that he disagreed with their psak. But I think that every bezdin, the judges have to be nachas to who they're going on to the bezdin with. They said if you thought you thought we were incompetent to make this decision, you shouldn't have agreed to be dayanim with us. So your being present makes you in some sense liable. So the Gemara says we're going to reject this whole line of reasoning. Let's say it's a different reason. The reason for this the different sheets are because of the lashon hara. Yochanan says you just say that potter, and we had this in the Gemara really before. We had this in the Mishnah, right? We said that the judge can't go out and say I agreed with you, but the other judges disagreed. So now the Gemara is really saying that this is the psak from the beginning. Yochanan says you don't say who said what because you don't want the person who's being forced to pay now to be angry at the judge who paskined against him. He says, because if it will be overturned, it's going to appear to be a falsehood when it gets overturned. He says both considerations are correct. We have to worry about lashon hara, and we have to worry about that at the beginning he was told you're entirely innocent, and there wasn't any indication that anyone disagreed. And then when the judge gets overturned, all of a sudden he finds out there was only two that paskined against him. Therefore, you indicate that there was a disagreement. It was a partial opinion. It was a split opinion, but that you came out to be whatever the case is. Pater or chayiv. Okay, we'll stop over here.
What's the halacha l'maisa regarding